This is a true story. Imagawa Yoshimoto, a powerful daimyo, feudal lord, pushed west with a massive army toward Kyoto. He planned to claim the capital and rule in the shogun's name. Scouts counted banners like a forest of spears. Drums rolled like distant thunder. Reports said 20 to 30,000 men, samurai, warriors, and a shigeru, foot soldiers, moving with iron confidence. Against him stood Oda Nobunaga of Owari, a young warlord mocked by rivals as reckless. He had far fewer soldiers, perhaps a tenth of Yoshimoto's strength. Even some of his own retainers doubted him. Hold the castles, wait for help, they urged. Hide behind walls. The advice was safe. It was also a slow death. Nobunaga listened, silent, eyes on a rough map spread across a lacquered table. He traced the hills south of his seat at Kiyosu Castle, the narrow valley called OKEHAZAMA, and the ridge lines that bent like elbows around it. He tapped the paper once with the tip of a folding fan. If the mountain is a fist, he said, voice low, we strike between the knuckles. Imagawa forces swept in from Mikawa and Suruga, crushing forts that guarded the frontier. Smoke rose from Marun and Washizu. The road to Owari yawned open. Yoshimoto's vanguard reported victory after victory, morale surged. He paused to rest in the low, humid basin near OKEHAZAMA, confident the Oda would retreat or kneel. At Kiyosu, nobles expected panic. Nobunaga surprised them. He tightened his armor, brushed dust from a plain cloak, and ordered rice cakes and tea. Then he sent small detachments to beat drums and wave a swarm of Oda banners around key strongholds, a show meant to look like full garrisons. Let him see walls, Nobunaga said. While we pass through the grass. He chose a strike team, fast riders, hand-picked samurai, spear lines with yari, spears, gunners with matchlocks, and light infantry who knew every stream and bamboo grove. He told them the truth, numbers would not save them. Only speed, surprise, and nerve. Yoshimoto thinks the game is settled, he said. So we will turn over the board. Outside, wind pushed gray clouds toward the south. The air felt close, heavy. A storm was coming. Nobunaga looked up as the first drop hit stone. He smiled, just a little. The march began. Imagawa Yoshimoto advanced like a parade. His officers guarded a long train of supplies, palanquins, and camp followers. His mon, clan crest, floated above ranks of spearmen and archers. The plan was simple and bold, smash Owari, then stride toward Kyoto. Rivals along the way would step aside or be crushed. He had reason for confidence. The Imagawa had prestige, manpower, and a disciplined corps. Their ally, young Matsudaira Motoyasu of Mikawa, later known as Tokugawa Ieyasu, moved with detachments to seize border forts and keep roads open. Every success fed Yoshimoto's certainty that Oda Nobunaga was an obstacle, not a threat. From a hill, Yoshimoto surveyed fresh trophies sent from fallen Oda outposts, captured helmets, torn banners, even drums. He accepted congratulations with a satisfied nod. One officer urged a cautious push. Another suggested a day of rest to feed the men and let stragglers catch up. Rest, Yoshimoto agreed. We celebrate small victories on the road to a greater one. Oda spies watched the tents multiply, the guards loosen, the noise rise. Inside Kiyosu, some Oda retainers muttered about surrender. Others urged a desperate stand at the castle, hoping to survive until outside help arrived. Nobunaga shut down the talk with a single line, if we wait, we die. He gathered his captains in the courtyard. No ceremonial speech. Only orders delivered like hammer blows. Decoy banners here. Drums there. Fires on the ridges to suggest a larger force. Meanwhile, he would take a lean column through the folds of land south of the main road. An older retainer hovered at the edge of the group. My lord, this is too bold. Nobunaga met his eyes. Boldness is the only road left. He walked to a small shrine, bowed once, and returned without ceremony. Armor buckled. Helmet tied. A plain war fan slipped behind his belt. He chose speed over pageantry, his horse wore no gaudy trappings. Messengers rode. Drums thudded from the walls of forts that were half empty, their noise designed to confuse Imagawa scouts. Smoke rose where Nobunaga wanted eyes to linger, silence fell where he intended to move. At dawn, he set off for Matsuda Shrine. Locals heard flutes and the clack of sandals as men jogged in loose files down narrow paths. Gun crews hugged wooded cover. Spear lines kept formation tight. The air pressed on their lungs, summer heat clung to armor like a second skin. Overhead, clouds gathered in a dark shelf. The giant's shadow was broad. But a shadow is not a shield. Nobunaga's column left the main road and slid into the folds of land south of the Imagawa vanguard. Guides pointed out gullies that ran like veins toward OKEHAZAMA. Bamboo thickets swallowed sound. Creeks flashed between stones, shallow enough to splash across without breaking pace. He organized the march like a blade, scouts out front, matchlock teams behind, Yari lines ready to pin any sudden push, mounted samurai anchoring the flanks. Runners moved between units with quiet hand signs. Every stop was measured in heartbeats, not minutes. At a ridge above a small temple, Nobunaga crouched beside his lead scout and studied the basin below. Tents. Banners. A clatter of pots. Laughter. The Imagawa camp looked relaxed, almost careless, as if the war had decided to pause. He marked guard posts, cook fires, and the largest pavilion at the center, Yoshimoto's. Too calm, a captain murmured. Good, Nobunaga said. He sent a decoy party toward the north, told to make noise near the forts, beat drums, and show extra banners. Another group moved to the west ridge, ready to light brush and shout as if a second Oda force had arrived. The goal, fracture attention, pull eyes away from the low ravine where the main strike would form. Rain freckled the dirt. The wind turned. The first rumble rolled over the hills. Nobunaga removed his helmet, closed his eyes for a single breath, then set it back in place. When the sky opens, he told his men, we move. Behind him, the ranks were thin but steady. Seasoned samurai with weather-worn faces. Young Ishigaru with tight hands on spear shafts. A handful of gunners primed their match cords under hats and cloaks. Lightning scratched the clouds. The temperature dropped like a stone. Now, he said. They slid down the ravine with the rain, feet light, voices tight, weapons hugged to armor. At the base, reeds hid their approach. The storm thickened, blurring banners and flattening drumbeats. Sound turned strange and close. The world narrowed to a few yards and a few orders. Hold fire. Keep pace. Straight to the center. Up on the ridges, decoy units lit brush and roared. Imagawa pickets turned, startled, heads lifting toward the false alarms. A tent flap whipped open. A cook shouted for help as wind scattered ash. The edge of the map had been reached. Beyond it lay the camp, and the heart of the Imagawa army. The storm hit like a drawn curtain ripped free. Sheets of rain hammered canvas and stamped out cooking fires. Horses tossed their heads and pulled at ropes. Guards hunched under cloaks, convinced no enemy would risk an attack in such weather. They were wrong. Nobunaga's column burst from reeds and scrub with a sudden blast of horns and a single beat of the war drum. No time for speeches. No time for elegant formations. Just speed. Yari lines drove straight through the outer ring of tents. Gunners fired at near distance, smoke choked by rain, but enough to shock and scatter. Samurai on foot and horseback slashed ropes, toppled poles, and crashed through guy lines. Raiders, an Imagawa officer cried, scrambling for a helmet. Too many for raiders, another shouted back. On the ridges, Oda decoys kept the noise rolling, drums, horns, shouted unit names, to create the illusion of multiple assaults. In the basin, Nobunaga pushed his spear core like a nail toward the largest pavilion. He knew the camp's middle was where panic could be turned into collapse. Inside the central tent line, Yoshimoto heard the confusion and stepped out to check the rain-smeared field. He wore light armor over robes suited for command, not heavy fighting. At first, he thought it was a skirmish gone wild. A messenger tumbled at his feet, panting, pointing toward the south where Oda banners flickered between tents. Impossible, Yoshimoto muttered. He wouldn't dare. But the storm had leveled the field. Scouts were blind, signals muffled, lines entangled. Units that should have responded in a snap took minutes to assemble, then found their paths blocked by collapsing tents and panicked horses. Nobunaga's voice cut through the rain. Center. Center. His men pivoted on a shallow rise, pressed forward, and smashed into the cluster of guards forming around the command pavilion. No time for clean ranks. It became a pushing match of short strokes and controlled fury, no gruesome detail, only the feel of urgency and aim. A captain grabbed Nobunaga's sleeve. The left is stalling. Then the right becomes the left, Nobunaga said, already shifting men by gesture and short commands. He fed a small group down a canvas corridor to hit the guards from an angle they had not braced. Lightning lit the scene. For an instant, Yoshimoto could see the Oda Lord silhouette moving with purpose, not frenzy. That sight, not the storm, was the true shock. Sound the assembly. Yoshimoto barked. But the storm swallowed the signals. And the blade was already at his throat. The Imagawa command ring tried to harden. Loyal guards in sturdy armor formed a hedge of yari, buying moments with disciplined thrusts. Officers shouted for cavalry, for archers, for order. Runners slipped on mud and vanished between tent rows. Drums tried to speak and only coughed. Nobunaga split his spear core in two and sent them snaking around the pavilion, one left, one right, to pinch the center. Gunners reloaded under cloaks and fired by sparks, every shot meant for noise and shock more than precision. The rain dulled the flame but not the fear. A young Oda standard-bearer planted the banner in a mound of wet earth so it could be seen. The sight cut through the fog, the underdog crest standing where it had no right to be. Men around it found their breath. Forward. The pavilion ropes snapped, canvas sagged, poles toppled. Inside, attendants rushed to move equipment in chests. Yoshimoto stepped back, reached for a katana, sword, and called for his horse. The horse arrived rearing, terrified by the flapping canvas and rolling thunder. An Imagawa captain grabbed his lord's arm. "My lord, the rear. We withdraw to the ridge and regroup." Yoshimoto hesitated. Pull back now, and the story would spread like wildfire, that great Imagawa fled his own camp. Stand and hold, and perhaps order could be restored. He chose to hold. Nobunaga saw the hesitation and pushed a wedge at the gap between the pavilion and a cluster of supply carts. "There," he snapped. "Break it." His footmen surged. An Oda rider crashed the cart line sideways, opening a channel that spearmen poured through. The command ring bent. A guard slipped, the line wavered. For a heartbeat, everything teetered. Then the wedge punched through. An Imagawa officer lunged at Nobunaga. A bodyguard parried, and both men tumbled harmlessly into a tangle of rope and canvas. Nobunaga didn't pause to chase glory. He pointed past the collapsing pavilion. "Find Yoshimoto. End the storm." Two Oda samurai, names preserved in some accounts as Hattori Kohida and Mori Shinsuke, cut through the thinning guard. They were not champions in a song, they were soldiers following a clear order. They saw their target through rain and smoke, a tall lord in command robes, light armor, trying to rally men with calm words that no one could hear. They moved. The knife was in the camp. The next stroke would decide the war. Near the pavilion's edge, Yoshimoto turned to face the breach, katana drawn, voice steady despite the chaos. "Hold the line," he told his nearest guard. "Reform behind me." The guard nodded and stepped forward. In the rain and clatter, two Oda attackers closed the distance with quick, trained footwork. No flourish. No shouted challenge. Pure intent. Their strikes came fast, controlled, aimed to end command, not to carve spectacle. A flash of steel. A stumble. The circle broke. Yoshimoto staggered, stunned by the suddenness, eyes widening as the impossible became real. Officers lunged to pull him back. The press of bodies turned the ground into a churned mess of mud and cloth. A tent pole fell, canvas smothered light. The guards fought to drag their lord clear, but the momentum had already shifted. Across the camp, the rumor traveled faster than any runner: "The lord is down." Then a correction, then a louder wave: "Yoshimoto is dead." Panic spread like spilled oil. Units that had been forming to counterattack instead drifted apart. Men looked for their captains and found empty space. Some threw down spears and fled for the ridges. Others froze, listening for an order that never came. Nobunaga heard the rumor and did not celebrate. He did what leaders do in the moment after a shock: he set boundaries. "Do not scatter," he told his captains. "Hold the center. Keep the banner high. Call back the left. Guard the prisoners. Take the drums." He forced shape back onto the chaos. He knew that victory can dissolve as quickly as fear. If his men chased too far, fresh Imagawa detachments might arrive and crush them against the hills. He wanted a rout, not a reversal. The rain began to ease. The storm had done its work. Smoke from wet matchlocks curled low. Horses stamped and snorted, calmer now that the wind had thinned. At the fallen pavilion, an Oda officer covered his men's faces from the sight of their own dead and set a cordon. "Order," he said simply. "We hold." In the center of that circle, the great lord of Suruga lay still, the grand march to Kyoto broken in a muddy basin no mapmaker had marked as a battlefield. The giant had fallen, not to a bigger hammer, but to a sharper plan. Word rolled toward the ridges like a second thunderclap. And then, at last, the Imagawa line broke. Once the core snapped, the rest went with it. Imagawa soldiers, brave men who had expected a measured campaign, found themselves leaderless inside a maze of leaning tents and slick ropes. Some fought hard retreats, others sprinted for higher ground. Officers tried to form rear guards but were swallowed by the flow. Oda units didn't chase in reckless strings. Nobunaga sent compact teams to seize key points: the horse lines, the drum pads, the baggage carts. He knew that taking the tools of command mattered as much as cutting down the guards. He had learned his opponent's strength, now he turned it inside out. "Flags down," he ordered. "Drums ours. Spare the messenger if he carries news we can use." He sent a rider to the ridges to halt his decoys. The louder the false attacks now, the harder it would be to keep his own men from running themselves to pieces. He replaced noise with signals, horns and short, sharp notes to indicate regrouping points. At the edge of the basin, a young commander with the Imagawa looked back once, then twice, then made his own choice: withdraw toward Okazaki and survive. This was Matsudaira Motoyasu, the future Tokugawa Ieyasu, still under Imagawa command. He fought a clean retreat with a handful of steadfast retainers, saving the corps that would, in another chapter of history, become the Tokugawa heart. Nobunaga let him go. The battlefield had already given enough. He would deal with tomorrow on another field. By mid-afternoon, the rain tapered to a damp haze. The Oda banner still stood where it had no business standing, in the center of the Imagawa camp. Survivors dropped weapons and raised both hands. Oda captains tagged wagons and stacked captured spears. Gunners dried match cords by careful coals. A veteran looked at his lord and shook his head with a small, disbelieving smile. We did it. Nobunaga didn't answer. He scanned the ridges, measuring the distances, counting fires. He had risked everything and won by inches. That kind of victory demands discipline in the hour after glory. He ordered a controlled pull toward defensible ground, posted watches, and sent fast riders to Kiyosu. Tell them, he said, the giant has fallen. Behind him, the field settled. The storm clouds broke just enough to let a pale light fall on abandoned tents and trampled flags. The road to Kyoto, once a distant dream, shifted from rumor to possibility. News raced faster than horses. By nightfall, inns from Owari to Mikawa buzzed with the same whispered line, Imagawa Yoshimoto is dead. Oda Nobunaga destroyed him in the rain. Some called it luck. Others called it madness. Those who saw the ground said it was neither. It was timing, weather, terrain, and nerve. At Kiyosu, retainers who had doubted bowed until their foreheads touched the floor. Nobunaga accepted their pledges without gloating. Stand up, he said. There is work. He sent messengers to nearby lords who had waited to see which way the wind would blow. The message was simple, the wind had changed. The Oda were no longer an isolated house clinging to a province. They were a rising force with proof in hand. In Mikawa, Motoyasu took stock. The Imagawa chain that held him had snapped. He returned to Okazaki and began reclaiming his own destiny, laying the groundwork for a name that would echo through later decades, Tokugawa. Back in the Oda camp, armor came off, wounds were bound, and the first dry fires took. Nobunaga allowed a single night of rest for the men who had sprinted into history. He walked the line, speaking little, nodding once to each watch post. A young Ishigaru, face streaked with rain and ash, stood straighter as his lord passed. My lord, he blurted, we were few. Nobunaga stopped. We were enough. He slept sitting, back to a post, hand on the war fan. Dawn found him awake before the birds. He ordered scouts to confirm the Imagawa withdrawal and to check the state of roads and bridges toward the capital. He was not drunk on victory. He was alert to its weight. Because impossible victories don't just win a day. They create a future no one planned for. He could feel the map shifting under his feet. The Battle of OKEHAZAMA did not end with more fighting, it ended with new math. Lords who had dismissed Nobunaga as a reckless upstart now recalculated. Merchants rechecked ledgers, sensing that trade routes might tilt toward Owari. Monks and courtiers took note. A door had opened. Nobunaga reorganized quickly. He rewarded those who had stood steady, folded in former doubters without humiliation, and set a clear message, competence over pedigree. He tightened discipline, improved scouts, and invested in more matchlocks, impressed by their effect even in a storm. He also showed restraint. He did not rush blindly toward Kyoto the next morning. He took the time to secure his borders, fortify key crossings, and build alliances. Letters went out to houses that would later become critical partners, most of all to the man in Mikawa who was shedding the Imagawa name. The path to a famous alliance had begun. In private, some retainers urged celebratory raids. Strike now while the world is stunned, they said. Nobunaga nodded at the energy but refused to squander it. Let the story run ahead of us, he answered. We will catch up when the ground is ready. He visited Atsuta Shrine again, left a simple offering, and stepped back into the heat of the day without ceremony. No boast. No long prayer. The work itself would be his thanks. Meanwhile, survivors told their versions. Some emphasized the storm, others the decoys, others the moment Yoshimoto fell. The truth held all of it, a daring decision, a narrow valley, noise where the enemy looked and silence where the blade slid through. Farmers repeated a single lesson to their sons, numbers mean nothing if the leader sees the ground better. The map of Japan was the same on paper. In reality, it had changed. The impossible victory at OKEHAZAMA reset destiny. Oda Nobunaga, once mocked as the Fool of Owari, had cut down a giant not with bulk but with judgment, weather, terrain, speed, and surprise. That day in the rain turned him from a regional player into a national force. From there, the path to Kyoto became a long campaign of choices. Nobunaga would build alliances, including with the rising lord of Mikawa, now known as Tokugawa Ieyasu, crush rivals who blocked the road, and push reforms that rewarded skill over birth. The old order, already strained, began to give way. Imagawa Yoshimoto's grand march toward the capital, so certain, so powerful, ended in a muddy basin few had heard of before the storm. His fall sent shockwaves through every hall from Suruga to the imperial court. It was the proof that audacity could redraw borders. But this is not a fairy tale. It is a turning point. After OKEHAZAMA came more battles, more gambles, more cold decisions. Yet historians agree on this: without the strike at the enemy camp, without the decoys and the dash through the rain, without the moment when a small force hit the heart of a larger one, there is no road to later unification. On that day, an underdog chose action over fear. He saw the land, felt the storm, and moved while others waited. The rest of his life, his rise, his reforms, his conflicts, sprang from a single choice made under dark clouds. The lesson endures: courage guided by strategy changes everything. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this cinematic history and want more epic true stories from Japan's past, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for the next legend.